All right. So today we are going to be tackling something that I think
Yeah.
pretty much all of us are familiar with, and that's procrastination.
Oh, yeah.
But we're not just going to talk about it. We're actually going to be diving deep into Brian Tracy's book,
Okay.
Eat That Frog, to
Right.
try to figure out
Right.
how we can use this information to actually become more productive.
Sounds good.
And, I think we've all had that feeling
Yep.
where we just look at our to-do list and we're like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, there's no way I'm going to be able to get all of this done.
Right.
So the goal is to use this information to become a true productivity powerhouse.
I like it.
And we're going to be covering some pretty interesting concepts like
Yeah.
the 80-20 rule, something called creative procrastination.
Interesting.
And we're also going to be discussing why doing things once is the key to getting things done.
You really hit the nail on the head there. It's that feeling of being completely overwhelmed. Like, where do I even begin? That oftentimes leads to us procrastinating in the first place.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
Tracy really emphasizes in his book that before we even think about tackling any task, we need to get super clear on what we want.
Right.
And get this,
Okay.
only 3% of adults actually write down their goals. And Tracy points out that those people actually accomplish significantly more than those folks that don't.
It's interesting how it works, right? It's not like writing it down is some magical thing.
Yeah.
But it's forcing you to get specific and to really clarify that goal in your mind.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
it's the difference between,
Yeah.
vaguely thinking, I want to go on vacation next year
Right.
versus actually buying that plane ticket.
Yeah, exactly. You're committed now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Tracy even says that a goal without a deadline is like a car without an engine.
Right.
It's just not going to go anywhere.
It's just going to sit there.
Yeah.
You need that push. You need that external force to get you moving.
Absolutely. And that ties directly into this idea of planning.
Oh, absolutely. Like you wouldn't bake a cake without first gathering your ingredients, right?
Oh, gosh. I've tried to do that.
Yeah.
It's a disaster.
Yeah, it's a mess.
Yeah.
And so many people approach their work that way.
Yeah.
They just dive in without a plan, and then they wonder why they're feeling overwhelmed and stressed.
Yeah.
Planning is key.
Proper prior planning prevents poor performance.
The 6 Ps, I love it.
There it is, yeah.
Even something as simple as just taking a few minutes the night before to make a list of what you need to accomplish the next day can make a huge difference. Sometimes, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but I've had times where I've been struggling with a problem, and then I go to sleep,
Yeah.
and I wake up the next morning, and I have the solution.
Oh, tell me about it.
It's like your subconscious mind has been working on it all night.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
that. The other day I woke up and I had the perfect solution to this work problem that had been bugging me for like weeks.
It's amazing, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
The power of the subconscious mind.
Yeah.
So, we're talking about planning, and we're talking about being strategic with our time.
Right.
And that brings us to another important concept, the 80-20 rule.
Okay.
I'm sure you've heard of it, but have you really thought about how to apply it to your own life?
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that we're all vaguely aware of.
Right.
But maybe we don't really sit down and think about how we can actually use it.
Exactly. And it's so powerful because it basically says that 20% of our efforts produce 80% of our results.
So it's about figuring out which activities are really moving the needle.
Precisely. And then focusing our time and energy on those high-impact tasks.
So if we have like 10 things on our to-do list, we need to figure out which one of those is really going to make us feel like we had a successful day.
Right. That one task that if you completed it, you'd feel like you could cross everything else off the list and still feel accomplished.
I like that.
Yeah,
So it's not about just getting things done, but getting the right things done.
absolutely. And that's a perfect segue into another important concept, long-term thinking.
Okay, now that's
Yeah.
that's kind of counterintuitive,
Might
right?
seem that way,
Yeah.
but hear me out.
Okay.
Because you might think, well, how does thinking about the long term help me stop procrastinating right now?
Yeah, exactly.
But Tracy argues that it's actually the opposite.
Okay.
He says that when we have a clear vision of our long-term goals, it actually makes it easier to make those tough decisions in the short term.
Interesting.
And there's actually research to back this up.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Dr. Edward Banfield from Harvard, he studied thousands of people over decades.
Wow.
And he found that what he called long-time perspective was the single biggest predictor of success.
And what does long-time perspective even mean?
It means being able to see the long-term consequences of your actions.
Okay.
And it was a stronger predictor of success than things like family background or even IQ.
Wow, that's pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's powerful stuff.
So the people who could kind of see the future consequences of their actions today
Right.
ended up making choices that were more in line with their long-term goals.
Exactly. And to help us make those choices, Tracy introduces the ABCDE method.
Okay,
Have you heard of this one?
I have not.
It's all about prioritizing tasks based on their importance and urgency.
Okay.
So A tasks are those really important ones, those big frogs that have serious consequences if we don't tackle them.
Okay.
B tasks are more like those little tadpoles, important but not as critical.
Okay, so no snacking on tadpoles when there's a big frog staring us in the face.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the key is to never tackle a B task while an A task is still on your list.
Oh, right. I'll try to remember that.
Now, once you have the ABCBE method down, you're ready to identify what Tracy calls your key result areas.
Okay.
These are the 5 to 7 things in your work that really determine your success or failure.
So these are the things that we absolutely have to nail.
Yes. The things that have the biggest impact on our overall performance.
But how do we figure out what those areas are?
That's where honest self-reflection comes in.
Okay.
You have to ask yourself, what results am I truly accountable for?
Mm-hmm.
And be brutally honest with yourself about your performance in each of those areas.
So acknowledging our weaknesses is actually a good thing in this case.
Absolutely. It's not about beating yourself up. It's about identifying those areas where you have the most potential for growth.
I like that. And so I want to pose this question to our listeners.
Okay.
If mastering one skill could dramatically improve your career, what would it be?
That's a great question. Think about that for a moment.
Yeah,
Because once you identify that skill, you can start taking steps to actually master it.
absolutely.
Now, with all this talk about key result areas and high-impact tasks, I know some of you might be feeling a little overwhelmed.
Yeah, it's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
But there's a principle that can help, the law of forced efficiency.
Okay.
And basically what that says is this: you'll never have time for everything, but you'll always have time for the most important thing.
I love that.
It's a shift in perspective, right?
It is, yeah.
It's not about doing it all. It's about doing the right things.
Absolutely.
And to make the most of that time on the right things, Tracy emphasizes the importance of preparation.
Okay.
Think about it like this. A chef preps all their ingredients before they even start cooking right.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Otherwise, it's just chaos in the kitchen.
Exactly. And the same goes for any task.
Yeah.
Whether you're writing a report or planning a meeting or coding a website, having everything you need at hand before you begin minimizes distractions and keeps you focused.
I am all about a clean workspace.
Me too.
I feel like when it's cluttered around me, my mind is cluttered.
Absolutely. A clear space equals a clear mind.
Yeah.
But preparation goes beyond just the physical.
Okay.
Tracy talks about doing your homework,
Mm-hmm.
becoming a student of your craft. Dedicate time each day to reading, learning, keeping your skills sharp.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
more, the easier it becomes to learn even more.
So it's like compound interest for your brain.
Exactly. Knowledge builds upon knowledge.
I like that.
So we've prepped our workspace, we've sharpened our minds.
Okay.
Now it's time to unleash our inner superhero.
All right, let's do it.
Let's tap into those unique talents that make us, well, U.S. Tracy calls it, leveraging your unique genius. What are you naturally drawn to?
Mm-hmm.
What puts you in that flow state where time just flies by?
You know that feeling where you're so engrossed in something you completely lose track of time?
Yes, that's a good sign you're tapping into your genius zone.
Okay.
And when you design your work with those natural abilities, work becomes less of a chore and more of something you actually enjoy.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it is. Now, even when we're in our genius zone, there will still be challenges.
Right.
And Tracy talks about identifying and busting through bottlenecks,
Okay.
the things that are holding us back from achieving our goals.
So what kinds of things are we talking about here?
Well, the interesting thing is that 80% of those constraints are internal.
Oh, so it's not always those external things that are holding us back.
Right. It's often the limitations we place on ourselves.
So it might be a lack of skill or a fear of failure or even just plain old bad habits.
Exactly. And it takes honest self-reflection to uncover those hidden roadblocks.
It's like shining a light on those dark corners of our minds and saying, okay, what's really going on here?
Precisely. And once you know what's holding you back, you can start breaking it down.
Okay.
Tracy uses a great analogy here. Crossing the Sahara Desert.
Okay.
It's daunting, right?
Yeah.
But the way they navigate it is by focusing on oil drums that are placed miles apart,
Okay.
one at a time.
So it's about breaking down those massive goals into smaller, more achievable steps.
Exactly. And each oil drum you reach fuels you to keep going.
I like that. And so in once we have that momentum going, it's time to tap into our inner motivational coach.
Absolutely. Tracy's a big believer in self-motivation.
Okay.
He says that we need to set higher standards for ourselves than anyone else could.
So we're not trying to impress our boss or our colleagues. We're trying to live up to our own internal standards of excellence.
Exactly. It's about building a strong reputation with yourself.
Okay. Now, that's all well and good, but, motivation can be a fickle thing.
It can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What are some strategies for making sure that we keep that energy high?
Well, Tracy emphasizes the importance of energy management.
Okay.
Are you getting enough sleep? Are you eating well? Are you moving your body? It's like fueling a high-performance car.
Okay.
You wouldn't put in cheap gas in a Ferrari, would you?
No way.
You got to treat that engine, right?
Yeah, you got it.
And the same goes for your body and mind.
Yeah, and that includes our mental fuel
Yes.
as well.
Absolutely. Making sure that you're taking breaks, de-stressing, and not running on fumes.
Okay, so we're taking care of ourselves physically and mentally.
Yes.
But sometimes those negative thoughts just creep in.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, and they try to sabotage our efforts.
That's where the power of positive self-talk comes in.
Okay.
Become your own cheerleader. Tracy emphasizes the link between our self-talk and our emotions.
Okay.
Those thoughts actually shape how we feel and ultimately how we behave.
So instead of beating ourselves up, we need to be our own hype squad.
Exactly. Celebrate the wins, big or small.
I like that.
Yeah.
And speaking of unexpected strategies, there's one that really caught my eye in the book,
Okay.
and that's creative procrastination.
Now, hold on a second.
Yeah.
I thought we were trying to beat procrastination.
I know, right?
Not get creative with it.
It sounds kind of crazy, but
It does.
Yeah.
But it's a really interesting concept.
yeah.
It's not about avoiding everything.
Okay.
It's about deliberately putting off low-value tasks
Okay.
to free up time for those high-impact activities.
So it's about being strategic with what we choose to not do.
Exactly. Look at your to-do list and ask yourself, if I wasn't already doing this, would I start it today? If the answer is no, maybe it's time to delegate, outsource, or ditch it altogether.
That's a game changer.
It is.
It's like giving ourselves permission to declutter our to-do list and really focus on what matters.
Absolutely. And before we get too carried away with delaying things,
Yeah.
we have to remember the core principle of the book, the Eat That Frog Challenge.
Okay, bring it on.
This is about tackling your most difficult task first thing in the morning.
Okay.
It's like a jumpstart for your productivity for the whole day.
I can already feel the sense of accomplishment just thinking about it.
Right.
Yeah, conquering that big frog right out of the gate.
Exactly. But let's be real.
Yeah.
Sometimes those frogs are so huge.
Yeah.
Even starting feels impossible.
I've been there.
We've all been there.
Yeah.
And that's where those techniques we discussed earlier come in.
Okay.
Remember the salami slice method? Breaking down those tasks into small sequential chunks.
Okay.
And if that's still too much, there's the Swiss cheese method.
Where you kind of punch holes in the task.
Yes. Working on it in short bursts.
Yeah, I actually really like that because even if you can get 15 minutes of focused work done,
Right.
that's a win.
It is a win.
Yeah.
It's about finding what works for you. But no matter what your method is, carving out dedicated time for that most important work is essential.
Yeah, I found that physically blocking out time on my calendar
Yeah.
helps a lot.
Visualize it.
Yeah.
Make it real.
Because, when you have that appointment on your calendar,
You don't cancel
you
it.
don't cancel it. Yeah.
You show up.
Exactly.
And that brings us to another principle. Develop a sense of urgency.
Okay.
Now, this isn't about rushing or creating unnecessary stress.
Okay.
It's about cultivating that inner drive to get things done quickly and efficiently.
So being proactive and taking initiative.
Exactly. Making things happen instead of waiting for them to happen to you.
I like it.
Yeah.
That energy.
It's contagious.
It is, yeah.
When you're decisive and action-oriented, it inspires others around you to step up their game as well.
Absolutely.
Now, speaking of taking action,
Yeah.
Tracy is a big advocate for what he calls single-handling every task.
And I think this is where so many of us fall into the multitasking trap.
Oh, the multitasking myth.
Yeah.
It's so pervasive. I
Yeah.
mean, people wear it as a badge of honor.
Yeah.
I'm a great multitasker, but the research actually shows that it makes us less efficient and more prone to errors.
It's like trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle.
That's a perfect analogy.
You might look impressive for a few seconds,
Right.
but it's not going to end well.
No, it's not.
Yeah. And I know I'm totally guilty of this.
Mhm.
I've got a million tabs open on my computer. My phone's buzzing with notifications. And I've got like
A million thoughts.
a million thoughts swirling around in my head.
Yeah.
It's no wonder that I don't get anything done.
It's the reality we live in, right?
It is, yeah.
But the key is to be mindful of those tendencies and to develop strategies to combat them.
So that might mean turning off those notifications or putting our phones on silent or even just using website blockers.
All great strategies.
Yeah.
Anything you can do to create that focus zone.
Yeah, minimize those distractions.
Minimize the distractions, because it's not just those external distractions, it's also the internal ones.
Right. The thoughts and worries that are always running through our heads.
Yeah, those could be even more distracting.
They can, yeah.
So learning to manage those is key as well.
Well, we have covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into Eat That Frog.
We have.
And it's clear that Brian Tracy has some really powerful and sometimes even counterintuitive insights into how we can become more productive.
He does.
But this is just the tip of the iceberg.
It is.
Stay tuned because we're going to be diving even deeper into these principles in the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait.
We'll be exploring things like energy management, self-motivation, and how to overcome those pesky internal constraints that can hold us back.
It's going to be good.
It is, so stay tuned.
You know, one of the things that really struck me about Eat That Frog is that it's not just about, like techniques and strategies. It's really about mindset.
Yeah, it's like he's giving you a whole new operating system for your brain.
Exactly. And a big part of that is cultivating what he calls a bias for action.
Okay.
And it's about being proactive, taking initiative, and making decisions quickly.
So it's not about being reckless, but it's about having that inner drive to just get things done.
Yes, exactly. And it's amazing how contagious that energy can be.
It is.
You know, when you're decisive and action-oriented, it inspires the people around you to step up their game as well.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that, when I'm feeling stuck or indecisive, it's like that can create this ripple effect of procrastination throughout my whole team.
Yeah.
But when I'm clear on my priorities and I'm taking action, it's like everyone follows suit.
Exactly. It's like setting the tone for a culture of productivity.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to taking action, Tracy is a big advocate for what he calls single-handling every task.
And this is where we dismantle the myth of multitasking.
Exactly. So many of us wear that multitasking ability as a badge of honor. But, the research actually shows that it makes us less efficient and more prone to errors.
It's like trying to juggle chainsaws while riding a unicycle.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, you might look impressive for a few seconds, but it's not going to end well.
No, it's not.
And I know I'm totally guilty of this,
Yeah.
I've got multiple tabs open. I've got my phone buzzing with notifications, and I've got a million thoughts swirling around in my head.
It's no wonder we feel scattered and unproductive sometimes.
Right.
It's the reality we live in. But the key is to be mindful of those tendencies and to develop strategies to combat them.
So that might mean turning off those notifications, putting our phones on silent.
Yes.
Or even using website blockers to keep ourselves from getting sucked into that digital vortex.
Exactly. It's about creating an environment that supports focus and concentration.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the external distractions.
Right.
We also need to learn to manage our internal distractions.
Oh, the thoughts and worries that can just derail our focus.
Yes, just as effectively as a ringing phone.
Yeah, and this is where I think mindfulness practices like meditation can be really helpful.
Absolutely. Learning to observe our thoughts without judgment and gently redirect our focus back to the task at hand.
Right.
That's such a valuable skill.
It is.
For anyone who wants to improve their productivity.
Yeah, it's like training our minds to be more disciplined.
Yes, exactly.
It's like we train our bodies for a marathon or something.
Now, let's talk about a principle that might seem a little counterintuitive at first.
Okay.
Creative procrastination.
Now, I remember when the first touched on this concept,
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute, aren't we trying to beat procrastination?
I know it sounds like a contradiction in terms.
It does.
But it's not about procrastinating in the traditional sense
Okay.
of simply avoiding tasks.
Okay.
It's about making conscious choices about what not to do.
So it's about being strategic with our time and energy.
Exactly.
Choosing to delay or delegate those tasks that are less important in favor of those that have a higher impact on our goals.
Precisely, Tracy challenges us to look at our to-do list with a critical eye and ask ourselves, if I wasn't already doing this, would I start it today?
That is such a powerful question.
It is.
Because it forces us to really evaluate the value of each task.
Yes.
And make sure that we're not just clinging to things out of habit or obligation.
And if the answer is no,
Yeah.
then it's time to consider delegating that task, outsourcing it, or even eliminating it altogether.
It's like giving ourselves permission to say no to the things that don't truly matter
Exactly.
so that we can say yes to the things that do.
Now, while creative procrastination can be a valuable tool for managing our workload,
Right.
it's important to remember that sometimes we just have to buckle down and do the hard things.
Right. We can't just procrastinate our way to success.
Exactly, and that's where the most difficult task first principle comes in.
This is where that eat that frog metaphor really comes into play.
Yes, this is about tackling our most challenging task first thing in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a jump start for our productivity,
Okay.
setting the tone for a focused and productive day.
And, Tracy argues that this is one of the most effective ways to actually overcome procrastination.
It is.
And to build momentum.
Yes, because you get that big, ugly frog out of the way.
Right.
And then the rest of your day feels easier and more manageable.
And I think there are probably some significant psychological benefits to that as well.
Oh, absolutely.
You complete that most challenging task first.
Yeah.
And you just feel this sense of accomplishment.
Yes, you feel like you can conquer anything.
Right.
And it boosts your confidence for the rest of the day.
It's like we've already climbed the biggest mountain.
Exactly.
So the rest of the hills seem smaller in comparison.
Let's be real, though. Sometimes those frogs are so big and intimidating
Yeah.
that even starting feels impossible.
Oh, I've been there.
We've all been there, and that's where those techniques we discussed earlier come into play. Remember the salami slice and the Swiss cheese methods?
Mm-hmm.
Those can be incredibly helpful for breaking down those daunting tasks
Okay.
into smaller, more manageable bites.
So instead of trying to swallow the whole frog at once,
Right.
we can slice it up,
Yes.
take it one bite at a time,
Yeah.
or even just nibble around the edges.
Yes.
Yeah, until we feel more confident tackling the bigger pieces.
It's about finding what works best for you and your work style.
Mm-hmm.
But the key takeaway is to not let those big challenging tasks paralyze you.
Right, yeah.
There's always a way to break them down and make progress,
I love that.
even if it's just one small step at a time.
Yeah, it's so empowering to realize that we have the power to choose
We do.
how we approach those challenges, and that by breaking them down into smaller steps,
Yeah.
we can make even the most daunting tasks feel achievable.
Now, in addition to managing our tasks, Tracy also emphasizes the importance of managing our energy levels.
Okay, because we can't just expect ourselves to operate at peak performance all the time.
No, we can't.
Without taking care of our physical and mental well-being.
Exactly. He dedicates an entire chapter to maximizing your personal powers.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all about recognizing that we're not robots.
Right.
We have limits.
Yeah.
And we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves so we can function at our best.
So that means prioritizing things like sleep, nutrition, exercise, and taking breaks throughout the day to recharge.
Absolutely. It's about treating ourselves with the same care and attention that we would give to a high-performance machine.
I think it's easy to fall into that trap of thinking that self-care is somehow indulgent or selfish.
It is.
But it's actually essential for our productivity and our well-being.
It's not selfish. It's essential.
Yeah.
It's like trying to run a car without ever changing the oil or
Right.
filling up the gas tank.
Yeah, eventually it's going to break down.
Exactly. And speaking of breaking down,
Yeah,
even with the best self-care practices, there will inevitably be times
right.
when we feel stressed, overwhelmed, or simply lacking in motivation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And that's where the power of motivating yourself into action comes in.
So this is about becoming our own personal cheerleader.
Exactly. Tracy offers a number of strategies for boosting our self-esteem, cultivating an optimistic mindset, and keeping ourselves focused on our goals.
So like using positive affirmations, focusing on solutions rather than problems.
Yes.
And celebrating our wins no matter how small.
All of those things.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that our thoughts have a powerful impact on our emotions and our behaviors.
Right, because we tend to act in accordance with our beliefs about ourselves.
Exactly.
Right.
If we constantly tell ourselves that we're not good enough,
Yeah.
that we're going to fail, or that we're just not cut out for this,
Right.
then we're more likely to give up or sabotage our own efforts.
So it's about becoming aware of that inner voice,
Yes.
challenging those negative thoughts,
Yes.
and consciously choosing to focus on more empowering and supportive self-talk.
Tracy emphasizes the importance of cultivating an optimistic mindset, choosing to see the good in every situation and to focus on solutions rather than problems.
So it's about believing in our ability to overcome challenges
Yeah.
and to achieve our goals.
And that belief in ourselves,
Yeah.
it's essential for overcoming procrastination and achieving any goal we set our minds to.
Okay, so we've talked about managing our energy levels.
Yes.
We've talked about the power of positive self-talk.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's revisit a principle that we touched on earlier, the power of planning.
Ah, yes. Planning, one of those fundamental principles. It's so easy to overlook,
It
but it's
is.
so essential for productivity.
Yeah, I think a lot of us resist planning
We do.
because it feels like it's taking away from the time that we could be spending actually doing the work.
Right. But Tracy emphasizes that every minute spent in planning can save us 5 or 10 minutes in execution.
So it's about being proactive rather than reactive,
Exactly.
about shaping our day instead of letting it shape us.
And when we plan our day, it's crucial to prioritize our tasks
Right.
and to focus on those activities that have the greatest impact on our goals.
And this is where that 80-20 rule comes in again.
Yes, remember, 20% of our efforts produce 80% of our results.
So the key is to identify those high-impact activities
Yes.
and to prioritize them accordingly.
It's about being ruthless with our time and energy, saying no to those tasks that are less important,
Right.
so that we can say yes to those that truly matter.
And once we've identified our top priorities,
Yes.
it's important to actually schedule them strategically,
Yes.
carving out those large chunks of time for focused work.
Those non-negotiable appointments with ourselves.
Exactly.
Because if we don't make time for our most important work,
Yeah.
it's likely to get squeezed out by all the other demands on our time.
Absolutely. And speaking of demands, even with the best planning and prioritization,
Mhm.
we can still feel overwhelmed by the sheer volume of tasks on our to-do list.
We can, and that's where a key principle from Eat That Frog comes into play.
Okay.
The law of forced efficiency.
I love this one.
It's so powerful.
It is.
It basically states that there's never enough time to do everything,
Right?
but there's always enough time to do the most important thing.
It's such a great refrain.
It is a refrain.
It's not about doing it all. It's about doing the right things.
Exactly. And by focusing on those high-impact tasks, those big, ugly frogs,
Mm-hmm.
we can make significant progress toward our goals, even when time feels scarce.
So to make the most of our time and energy, it's crucial to prepare thoroughly before we begin any task.
Oh, absolutely. Tracy uses a great analogy here.
Okay.
He compares preparation to a chef prepping ingredients before cooking.
Oh, absolutely.
You wouldn't start making a complex dish without having all your ingredients chopped,
Right.
measured,
Right.
and ready to go right.
No way.
And the same principle applies to any task,
Right.
whether it's writing a report, planning a meeting,
Mm-hmm.
or tackling a creative project.
Having everything we need at hand before we begin can dramatically reduce distractions and increase our focus.
Exactly. So that might involve gathering the necessary materials,
Mm-hmm.
clearing our workspace,
Right.
silencing our phones, or
Mm.
even just mentally preparing ourselves for the task ahead.
It's about setting ourselves up for success.
Exactly. Now, even with the best preparation,
Right.
there will be times when we need a little extra push to get going,
Oh, yeah.
and that's where the principle of putting the pressure on yourself comes in.
Okay.
Tracy challenges us to become our own taskmaster,
Mm-hmm.
setting deadlines,
Mhm.
creating accountability systems,
Mm.
and pushing ourselves to perform at our best.
So how do we actually do that?
Well, he suggests a few strategies. One is to work as if we had to leave town tomorrow for a month
Okay.
and ask ourselves, what absolutely must get done before I leave?
I like that because it creates that sense of urgency.
It does. It forces you to prioritize.
Yeah.
Another strategy is to set deadlines for ourselves
Mhm.
that are slightly shorter than we think we need.
Okay.
This creates a little bit of pressure,
Right.
which can be a good thing.
Yeah.
It can help us stay focused and avoid procrastination.
And sometimes that extra push is exactly what we need to break through our own inertia and get things moving.
Now, while self-discipline is essential for productivity,
Mm-hmm.
it's also important to acknowledge our limits
Right.
and to take care of our physical and mental well-being.
Right. We can't just burn ourselves out trying to do it all.
Exactly. Tracy reminds us that we have personal powers
Okay.
that need to be nurtured and replenished.
So this involves getting enough sleep, eating a healthy diet,
Yes.
exercising regularly, and taking breaks throughout the day to recharge.
It's about treating our bodies and minds with respect so that we can perform at our best.
And when we're feeling our best, we're more likely to make good decisions, stay focused, and get things done.
Exactly. And that brings us to another key principle from Eat That Frog. Practice creative procrastination.
Wait a minute, procrastination again.
I know, right?
I thought we were trying to conquer that.
We are. But Tracy makes a distinction
Okay.
between unproductive procrastination
Mm-hmm.
and what he calls creative procrastination.
So what's the difference?
Well, unproductive procrastination is about avoiding tasks we don't want to do,
Mm-hmm.
often leading to feelings of guilt and overwhelm.
Right.
Creative procrastination, on the other hand,
Okay.
is about deliberately choosing to put off low-value tasks
Okay.
to free up time for those high-impact activities.
So it's about being strategic with our procrastination, making
Exactly.
sure that we're delaying the right things.
Precisely. Tracy encourages us to ask ourselves a powerful question when evaluating our to-do list.
Okay.
If I wasn't already doing this,
Mm-hmm.
would I start it today?
That's a great question to ask.
It is.
Because if the answer is no,
Yeah,
then maybe it's time to reconsider the value of that task.
exactly.
Maybe it can be delegated, outsourced, or even eliminated altogether.
Freeing up your time and mental energy for those activities that truly move the needle.
Okay, so we've talked about creative procrastination.
Yes.
Now let's talk about a crucial aspect of productivity,
Okay.
the do the most difficult task first principle.
This is where the eat that frog metaphor really comes into play.
Right.
This is about tackling our most challenging task first thing in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a jump start for our productivity, setting the tone for a focused and productive day.
And Tracy argues that this is one of the most effective ways to overcome procrastination
It is.
and to build momentum.
It is. You get that big ugly frog out of the way.
Right.
And then the rest of your day feels easier and more manageable.
And I think there are probably some significant psychological benefits to that as well.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you complete that most challenging task first and you feel this sense of accomplishment.
You feel like you can conquer anything.
Right.
It boosts your confidence for the rest of the day.
It's like we've already climbed the biggest mountain, so the rest of the hills seem smaller in comparison.
Now, even when we're committed to tackling our most difficult task first, it can still feel overwhelming at times.
It can.
And that's where some of Tracy's other techniques come into play.
Okay.
For instance, he suggests slicing and dicing the task,
Okay.
breaking it down into smaller, more manageable chunks.
So this is where the salami slice and the Swiss cheese methods come in handy.
Exactly. Instead of looking at the entire project as one massive undertaking,
Mm-hmm.
we focus on.
Okay, so we've sliced and diced those frogs. We're single-handling like pros.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, what about those tasks that just feel like,
Oh.
ugh, I don't want to do this?
Yeah, the ones you would put off forever if you could.
Yeah, exactly.
Because that's where leveraging your special talent comes in.
Oh, okay.
Tracy argues that we all have unique abilities
Right.
and that we're most productive and fulfilled when we're working in those areas of strength.
So it's like figuring out what you're naturally good at and then building a career around it.
Exactly. It's about finding that sweet spot where your passions and your talents intersect.
Because when you're doing work that you love, it doesn't really feel like work, does it?
It really doesn't.
And when you're engaged and enthusiastic about your work, you're naturally more productive and creative.
Absolutely.
So it's not just about getting things done.
Right.
It's about getting the right things done in a way that plays to your strength.
Precisely now. Even when we're working in our areas of strength,
Right.
there will still be challenges and obstacles along the way.
Absolutely. No matter how skilled or talented we are,
Right.
there are going to be times when we feel stuck or frustrated or unsure and how to proceed.
And that's where the principle of identifying your key constraints comes in.
Okay.
This is about pinpointing those bottlenecks that are holding us back from achieving our goals.
It's like detective work for your productivity.
Exactly. Figuring out what's really slowing you down.
So what are some common constraints that people might face?
Well, the interesting thing is that Tracy emphasizes that 80% of constraints are internal.
Oh, so it's not always those external factors like a lack of resources or difficult colleagues.
Right. It's often about the limitations that we place on ourselves.
So it could be things like a lack of skill or a fear of failure or even just bad habits.
Exactly. And it takes honest self-reflection to uncover those hidden roadblocks.
So that's the first step, becoming aware of those internal constraints. And once we've identified those constraints, what's next?
Well, then it's time to develop strategies for overcoming them.
Okay.
That might involve taking courses, reading books, seeking out mentorship, or simply practicing new skills.
So it's about being proactive in addressing our weaknesses and continuously striving for improvement.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important principle from Eat That Frog. The idea of taking it one oil barrel at a time.
I love this analogy.
So good.
It's about breaking down those overwhelming goals into smaller, more manageable steps.
Tracy uses the example of crossing the Sahara Desert,
Right.
where the only landmarks are these oil drums placed miles apart.
Yeah.
And the key to navigating this vast expanse is to simply steer for the next oil drum, one at a time.
So it's about focusing on what's immediately in front of you.
Yes.
Trusting that the next step will become clear as you move forward.
and that each small victory, each oil drum reached, will fuel your motivation
Right.
and help you build momentum toward your ultimate goal.
So it's not about trying to tackle the entire mountain at once. It's about taking those small, consistent steps that will eventually lead you to the summit.
Exactly. And that same principle applies to overcoming procrastination.
Mm.
Instead of focusing on the enormity of the task ahead,
Yeah.
we just focus on taking that first step, then the next and the next.
Breaking down those mental barriers and replacing them with a sense of momentum and progress.
Now, the oil drum approach is a great strategy for managing large, complex tasks.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also important to remember that sometimes we need a little extra push to get ourselves going.
We do.
And that's where the principle of putting the pressure on yourself comes in.
Yes, the art of self-motivation.
Exactly. It's about setting deadlines, creating accountability systems,
Mm-hmm.
and pushing ourselves to perform at our best.
So how do we put this into practice?
Well, one strategy is to imagine that we have to leave town tomorrow for a month
Okay.
and ask ourselves, what absolutely must get done before I leave?
It's a great way to create that sense of urgency.
It is.
And prioritize those tasks that truly matter.
Another strategy is to set deadlines for ourselves that are slightly shorter than we think we need.
Okay.
This creates a little bit of pressure, which can be a good thing.
Yeah.
It can help us stay focused and avoid procrastination.
And sometimes that extra push is exactly what we need to break through our own inertia and get things moving.
Now, while self-discipline is essential for productivity,
Mm-hmm.
it's also important to acknowledge our limits and to take care of our physical and mental well-being.
Right. We can't just burn ourselves out trying to do it all.
Exactly. Tracy reminds us that we have personal powers that need to be nurtured and replenished.
So getting enough sleep, eating a healthy diet, exercising regularly,
All of those things.
and taking breaks throughout the day to recharge.
It's about treating our bodies and minds with respect so that we can perform at our best.
And that brings us back to the core message of Eat That Frog, the importance of taking action.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just read about these principles.
Right.
We have to actually put them into practice.
So what's the one thing that you hope our listeners will take away from our deep dive into Eat That Frog?
I think the biggest takeaway is that we all have the power to choose how we approach our work and our lives.
We do.
We can choose to be reactive, overwhelmed, and constantly putting things off.
Yeah.
Or we can choose to be proactive, focused, and in control of our time and our energy.
It's a choice that we make every single day.
And the more we practice these principles from Eat That Frog, the easier it becomes to make that choice.
Right. The choice that leads to greater productivity, fulfillment, and success.
Exactly.
Well, that's it for our deep dive into Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog.
I hope you enjoyed it.
We hope you found it insightful and inspiring, and we encourage you to keep exploring these ideas.
Keep learning and keep pushing yourself to achieve your full potential.
And until next time, happy learning, and don't forget to eat that frog.